Good morning. So, anything new with any of you? Any questions, any comments about anything before we go home? Assignments. So it's due on Sunday, right? And you're wondering how you should approach them. Okay. Have you talked about this at all in the past? Well, it's not going to be much help, but nevertheless. Let's say you're listening to an audio or watching a video that talks about making rice. And let's say you go somewhere and you have some rice and you say, wow, that's delicious. And you want to write about that. So what I suppose the next question would be is, well, how do you make rice? Well, you can go somewhere, buy some rice for yourself, or you can get some raw rice and go home and cook it. So how do you do it? You need to know the steps. If you don't know the steps of how to make a desire come to life, then it just remains abstract. Kind of like Trump, you'll say, I have a concept, but really not a plan. The plan requires knowledge. Okay? So there comes a point in your writing the essay where whatever it is that you're talking about, whether it's compassion, forgiveness, getting an A, I need to know the steps. Okay. So in regards to coming up with steps to making rice, you say, well, you get a pot, you get some water, you boil it, you put some salt, some oil, and when the water is boiling, everything gets mixed, then you put the rice in there. You let it boil for about 5 minutes, then you simmer it. Let the water out. Put some butter at the very bottom, some potatoes, slice them. Put the rice in, put some water, let it sit for about an hour. Beautiful rice. Steps. And when you give me the steps, it means that you've thought about it, you've actually applied it, you know how it works. Does that? And then imagine this entire class wants to know how to make rice. Well, it's one thing for you to make rice, it's another for the entirety of this class to make rice. Why? Because you have to get the attention and interest of about 20 people. How do you make that happen? Social justice, removing racism, compassion, kindness, forgiveness. Well, if it's a social issue, well, how do you make it happen?
Make it exciting.
Well, make it exciting, sure. The point I'm trying to make is don't just give me bumper stickers. I read plenty of that when I'm driving home. Anyone else before we... Yeah.
The formatting?
I don't care. Font, about maybe 72. I like pink, the color, and no spacing. Anything else?
I type it in Comic Sans.
The what?
May I type it in Comic Sans?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's it? Well, good. Yeah.
Where does faith stem from if you're not a religious person? Is it still faith or is it something?
Is it faith, F-A-I-T-H, or F-A-T-E?
F-A-I-T.
Like, you and I boyfriend, girlfriends. I call you and we just had a fight. Let's say I left the house and I call you and say, so Avery, what are we having for lunch? You say, I'm making a turkey sandwich. I have faith in you knowing, or at least hoping, that you haven't poisoned my sandwich. Is that what you mean? Faith?
Like religious faith.
Like destiny?
Like faith in God.
Oh.
F-A-I-T-H.
So where does faith come from, you say?
Yeah. But if you're not religious, is that still faith or is it something?
Can we change the word faith for, say, a belief? How do you come to believe in anything? In 1979, I went back home to Iran from India. There was a revolution. It's beautiful. I don't know if you ever walked around the lake by yourself or walked anywhere by yourself and you happen to be in somewhat of a dark, negative mood. Not necessarily bad, you're just very reflective, you're inward. And it dawns upon you that you're so alone. And despite having all sorts of feelings and emotions about you, despite having a rich past, it may be traumatic, but nevertheless, that there is no one out there who can see you, listen to you, I suppose, break bread with you emotionally. It's kind of like if you've seen the painting by Edward Munch, a Norwegian painter, it's called The Scream, that there are people in front of you, behind you, on your sides, you're passing by this bridge. And we're talking about the 19th century. It's a time where people are slowly becoming very isolated. And so he screams, hoping that someone will run to him, embrace him, hug him, kiss him, give him some comfort, but no one does. People are just laughing, that nobody really cares anymore about anything. At any rate, one of the things that revolutions or mass movements does is that it removes you from your isolated self. You know, it's like you're sitting home alone, you're sad and pathetic. All of a sudden your parents call and say, we're coming over. And even though you don't really want company, once your parents are there, you all of a sudden realize it's good to be around other people. You no longer think about yourself. You no longer just think about your issues, whatever they may be. And so other people allow you to escape from yourself. And that's a wonderful thing. So when I went back in 1979, I was a young kid, but every morning you go out and there are hundreds, if not thousands of people marching and all shouting, you know, down with the Shah, justice and fairness and brotherly love, if you will. It was such a wonderful time. And we did all of this for one reason. There was a belief, and inside that belief was hope, guided by imagination, maybe wishful thinking, that once we get rid of the president, when the new one comes in, everybody will have money, everybody will have a house, everyone will have food, everybody will be able to go to school. But none of those things really happened. One of the nice things about faith or any belief system is that as long as it's out there in space, as long as it doesn't come down to be tested by real life, it sounds really wonderful. But the moment it gets challenged, you know, when you bring it down here, you realize, well, you know, it's kind of like writing the essay. You believe yourself to be an intellectual, someone who reflects and thinks and feels about things and is able to examine, observe, and then process and then express them on paper. And then you go home, let's say today, and you start doing the essay. And you realize that every time you sit to write a couple of sentences, you just fall extremely short. You had a belief system that I, Avery, am a really, really good thinker. I can do this, no problem. The belief comes down, and now you're being tested by real life in real time, and you realize that's the belief system right there, but this is the reality of the belief. Iran was a religious country. It has been for 4,000 years. For the past 40 years, we've had a religious government, so to speak, if you want to call it that. And that system has brutalized people, traumatized people, no different than what Trump has done to America, to the point that these young kids, seeing religion on a daily basis and what it does to destroy people's lives, now they go into the streets and they burn the Quran, very much like burning the Bible, like burning the American flag. You looked at the flag at some point, it inspired hope, dreams. Now when you realize what America actually does to people, you say, you know what, the flag is fake, it's counterfeit, let's just burn it. Very much like the Quran. So there are two things about a belief system. A belief can remain abstract, way out there, like I can love, and I can be a great lover, and I can be a great companion, I can be a great this and a great that. Wonderful. And you have faith in the things you believe. And then eventually you'll get into a relationship. And you realize relationships require resources you never imagined. You don't have, so it's going to fall apart. I suppose the other question that would be worth asking is, how do beliefs come about? How does one become faithful in anything? If I was your father, there would be a good chance that you'd be a Muslim and not a Christian. If you were born in Iran and you also had a Persian mother, there's a good chance that your skin would be a different color. You would have a different set of belief systems. You would look at America different. You would look at Americans differently. You would look at perhaps the entire universe in a very, very different way, much more darker, much more pessimistic, because you had been contaminated by the Persian culture. So a good amount of who and what you are and what you believe in, really, first depends on the culture from which you come. Go back to one of the episodes in A Prince of Bel-Air. Carlton lives in Bel-Air. He lives in a mansion, in a gated community. He's perhaps never experienced racism. Then his best buddy, Will, comes from somewhere. They go on a drive. They get pulled over by a white cop. Carlton doesn't believe that the white police officer is racist until, of course, his father comes in and says, release my kids, otherwise I'll sue this department, and the kids are released. At the very end of the movie, of course, Will Smith, throughout this entire prison time or cell time, tries to convince Carlton that the police officers was, in fact, racist. But that's a strange language for Carlton because it's not in his vocabulary, it's not in his experience. So he's going to chalk it up to, it's an innocent mistake. Will Smith, on the other hand, because he comes from a different background, and that background offers him a different set of experiences, knows better. No, it's not an innocent mistake. He is racist. And then near the end of the movie, Carlton stands in front of his father and asks his father a question he's never asked before. Do you think that we were held in jail because the cop was racist? And the father doesn't say anything. He just leaves. And Carlton stands in this big hall, all by himself. And he has to figure out if the cop was in fact racist or it was an innocent mistake. It's a dilemma that all of us have to go through, not necessarily within the context of just racism alone. Right? So first is the culture from which you come. You are the hardware, you come as a kid, you have nothing on you. Your parents make you a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, or an atheist. If you have an abusive father, you'll probably have a good amount of anger inside you. It'll be very difficult to trust, to love. If on the other hand, both parents are around and they love you, and every time you scream, they run towards you and hug you, embrace you, kiss you, there's a good chance you'll have, especially if they have an open door policy, that people come and go all the time. Hello, you trust people. You like people. You're much more sociable. The other aspect of how beliefs come about is your own personal experiences. You have no reason to doubt relationships because your first role models have been your parents and they've always been good to you. Now you're an adult. As Sigmund Freud would say, you let go of your parents' hands and you walk into the social world. The social world is dangerous, but that's not what you've been taught because your parents never took you to the worst parts of Oakland. You're like Carlton in a gated community. So, and you try to find certain qualities in men that resemble your fathers. You love your father. So you find someone, let's say Mr. Love in the back, and he has similar qualities to your father. You don't know much about his past. The way he looks, perhaps, the tone of his voice, some of his mannerism, his body language, so you gravitate towards him. Is Freud right in the sense that ultimately we pick our parents to marry? Absolutely. But why wouldn't we? They're the first people we love. That's your GPS. And so you give to Quinn what you've always given your parents, 110% of who and what you are. But you also give him another priceless gift, which is your body. You've never been intimate, and that's the first guy you're with. And you have no reason to doubt him. You know, you check him, you put him in the context of your history, and you say, I have never been wronged by anyone. He's not going to wrong me. Now, that's your personal experience. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to be a virus to your software. You've never had a belief that relationships could be toxic, that someone could betray you, abuse you, damage you. That's not in your software. But little by little, you realize, well, he comes from a different culture, different tradition, he's a different age, his background is different. Little by little, you realize that you're getting virused up. You want to get up like what you've done every day for the past 20 years, go for a jog, but he's contaminated you. You think about him and the toxins of the relationship, and you say, you know what? I don't want to jog today. I just want to lay in bed. And you want to go to sleep, like all the Saturdays and Sundays you have. But the thought of this guy and where this relationship is going, that's another poison to the system. And little by little, what you have is a 17-year relationship you have with your parents and a 2-month relationship you have with love. And little by little, you have a different belief system in what relationships are. You're less trusting. Eventually, it's going to break you. You're going to get depressed. Something that your parents never experienced. And if they experienced, it had to do with money, getting fired from a job. It wasn't on a personal, individual level. It was on a social level. You, on the other hand, it's personal. And so you recover from this poison we call love. You heal, but not completely, because now you have a past. You have an experience. That experience has ruined you. Now you have an addition to the belief system. And it's not in small print, it's big print. It's a footnote, but big print nevertheless. Relationships are wonderful. Love is wonderful. But there is a big warning sign now, something you never had. So, really a good amount of who you are depends on who's in your life.
Would you prefer to be alone?
Well, it depends how you've come to be alone.
By choice.
I'm not quite sure. Let's figure that out. Okay. So Anthony's question is, what if you want to be alone?
No.
Well, let's kind of go through this. Let's remove some of the disabilities from this. If you're autistic, if you have some, I suppose, mental or health issues that push you into isolation, we're not talking about that. Okay? Children, by their very nature, desire to be around people. Our senses, the 5 senses that we have, bring the world inside us. They create relationships. And anything in this relationship that brings about pleasure, we gravitate towards. You don't just look at the mirror to see your own reflection. You choose your friends carefully because you want them to reflect back some of the things you see about yourself. If you want to always think about yourself as wise and reflective, well, you're going to hang out with people who ask you questions all the time. You want to go out with people who are broken all the time so you can play the doctor game with them. Okay? Now, there is this Persian poem by Hafiz من از بیگانگان هرگز ننالم که با من هرچه کردن آشنا کرد. That I'm never going to complain about strangers because all the hurt that lives inside me has been committed by those that I know. I can't really hurt you that much, but your best friends can, your parents can. What can I say? I can say something that offends you for a minute, depending how strong your trigger points are and how traumatic they are. I can either piss you off that'll last for like weeks or months, or hopefully, usually they'll just pass by quickly. So if you examine your lives very, very quickly, you realize the people who can hurt you the most are those who know you really, really well. That's why you should always remain very, very secretive about who and what you are, so you don't give other people weapons to destroy you. Now, in the 21st century, 2024, as we are able to be less social, less communal, less trusting, and with the invasion of technology, you realize that you're glued to your cell phone. Some of the abilities that our parents had, grandparents had, such as being social, communal, we no longer have them. And even though some of us in this class may truly desire to be with other people, you realize that it's a capacity we no longer possess. We have a much stronger relationship with our cell phones and technology than with other human beings. So culture pushes us into isolation. That's one way of being isolated. We don't really want to be alone, but we have too many addictions, too many bad habits that drive people away. Sometimes I hang out with some people, and they say, "So how are you doing?" while they're looking at their phone. I don't answer, I simply walk away. Because I can't compete with technology, and I don't want to compete, And if their question has, for example, double intention, I am playing with my phone, I'm also asking how you're doing. Well, it doesn't work that way, at least not for me. Maybe I'm too greedy. I want all the attention, okay? The other aspect of loneliness and isolation is that, I don't know, maybe you were married. For 20, 30, 40 years, your wife or your husband died. It's too difficult to go back out there and find dates. Every time you go sit with someone and have coffee, they remind you of your husband or your wife or some lost companion. So not to feel the memories, not to feel the pain or the hurt, you desire to be isolated. The other is you've tried, you've been there, you've done that, you realize you just don't have the resources to be a good companion to anyone. And nobody really wants to be around you. So you have this philosophy of life that it's best to be alone. Not because you want to, it's just you're not digestible. There is something that's profoundly wrong with you. Aristotle called these people beasts, animals. They just don't have the ability to be around other people, and other people don't want to be around them either. For those of you who can truly be alone and enjoy your loneliness or aloneness, any of you in this class have heard of Vincent van Gogh?
Yeah. That is zero.
Any of you in this class have some knowledge about his life?
Pretty right.
He was a complete mess for a long, long time. He was so depraved and deprived that anytime any woman looked at him, he would fall in love within just a couple of minutes. He died a very lonely man. The three women that he had relations with, they all left him because they were just not digestible. Some people say he committed suicide. He was of the temperament that he just couldn't be social. He couldn't be communal. He loved people. For those of you in this class who are familiar with Bobby Fischer, in the 1970s and 80s, he was a grandmaster chess player. He was a world champion. He was also a guy who suffered from paranoia. And he thought that the FBI, CIA, KBG are after him. But near his death, he said, there is nothing more magical than the human touch. It's a guy who couldn't be around people. And yet when he was being nursed and the person taking care of him, kind of once in a while massage his forehead, massage his feet, near the end of his life he came to realize, only if I had the capacity to be around people and to be intimate with them from a young age, but he couldn't. So for those of you in this class who are not temperamentally designed to be isolated and have found your niche in life, you're an artist of sorts, you're a poet, you're a thinker, you like to go on long hikes with your notepad, and once in a while sit, open your thermos, drink yourself some coffee and write your thoughts down, you have a great companion. It's called your ability to think, your reflective companion. You sit and your pen and your notepad are the things that you need most. Now, here's the thing that you need to know about people who are, for the most part, self-sufficient. They are extremely attractive, if not physically, certainly emotionally and intellectually. You will find yourself attracted to these people. But you need to understand you're always going to be at the very footnote of their life. They have been married to their intellect, to their creativity for a long time. You simply walk into their life so they can have coffee with once in a while, sleep with once in a while, have dinner with once in a while, rest with once in a while. So that is a good loneliness or aloneness to be had. Iska. Anything? Anyone else? Howard. Idealism? Okay. Let me talk about idealism in a very personal way. Forgive me for the self-indulge, but it's okay, right? Were you in my classes in year 2000? You weren't even born. How about 2005? Maybe 2010? No? Okay. Well, if you had met me in my late 20s, you would have found something very interesting. My classes would be governed by students. I would simply come to class, raise a couple of questions, and then students, like nice puppies, they would look at the idea like a bone. They would all run after, and everybody's hand would go up. Well, I have something to say about this, and I have something to say about that. And students found it interesting, and it was interesting. They were engaged. One of the reasons where boredom appears is when you're not really engaged, physically or intellectually. I mean, I can see the look on some of the people in this class, you know, they're bored because they can't find the things I say relevant or interesting. And so when you don't find yourself interested in the things around you, then boredom will appear. And then you'll keep looking at the clock and you say, why the hell is it moving so slow? And then that irritates you. And then irritation turns into frustration. And frustration kind of forces you to look at me and say, when is he going to stop? And then that's a very upsetting thing for you. Will give you ulcer in the long run. And then, of course, you'll be angry, and then you'll go to your Facebook page and you'll post something really nasty about this class and me. But for the first 20 years of being in the classroom and teaching, students would not find themselves bored because everybody was engaged. Well, then I got older. Then I began to sit back and observe my experiences. I began to look at time differently, energy differently, students differently, myself differently, ideas differently, American culture and its impact on students differently. Then I looked at Oakland differently, divorce rate differently, depression differently. Then I also realized that, well, human beings want to participate. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then you examine the way people spend money in this culture, the concerts they go to, the books they read, the movies they watch. And then I sat back and said, okay, I have another maybe 5 or 10 good years left before my body starts to decay. And I suffer from dementia, begin to forget all the things that I so painstakingly read and tried to memorize and implement in my own life. How the hell will I want to spend it? And what you realize is that as you age and as you become more observant, you become less idealistic and you become more realistic. Now, the thing with being realistic is you become profoundly grounded. Let me give you an example. Are you a Christian? Let's just say you are. And let's say you love Jesus Christ. And you should. He was a nice man with long hair and blue eyes, and who wouldn't fall in love with that, right? He was like a true American 2,000 years ago. And then look at the life of Moses. Now, Jesus is very, very, very optimistic, very realistic. Forgive. Turn the other cheek. Inside you lives the kingdom of God, right? This is a guy who is very much like a hippie, without the drugs. At the age of 12, if the stories are accurate, and they're not, but let's just say they are, he leaves his parents. He goes somewhere for 18 years, Egypt, Persia, India, who the hell knows? He discovers a few things, finds out a few things, and comes back and tells people, if you follow me, you'll get A, B, C, D. Well, people did follow him for a number of years, and they got nothing. But they did follow him, and he did make great promises. Now compare that to the realism of someone like Moses. Moses is a guy who was a very, very rich man. But something very interesting happened to him. At the age of 25, 26, maybe 30, maybe 40. It's like, I'm a man right now, and I'm 60. Imagine in the next couple of months, something happens to me where I say to myself, for some strange reason, I don't quite fit this masculine body. I become a bit more feminine. Maybe I desire to be completely a woman. So Moses all of a sudden experienced an identity crisis. They tell me my mom was a Hebrew, but I thought I was the Pharaoh. What the hell is that? Who am I? Am I this or am I that? So he goes on this quest to figure things out. The problem with going on this quest is the following. This is not a guy who has nothing. This is a guy who has everything. He goes on this quest. He comes back having found a few things, discovered a few things about the human being. And you know what he says? I don't care how you feel about your parents. You respect them. I don't care about the gray areas. Don't lie, period. I know you're walking around. A lot of people are showing a lot of skins. Just don't covet, period. He doesn't say, well, you can see with your eyes, but don't see with your heart. He's not a hippie like Jesus. So the point I'm trying to make is this. Moses sees his people being crucified. So does Jesus. Jesus promises them something that the hippies would. Out there somewhere. Forgive, forget, compassion. Not Moses. You slap me, I'm just going to slap you back. So realism really has to do with the fact that life has pushed you a little bit. You no longer look at love the way you did when you were 18 or 19. You've gone through 5 or 6 relationships. You know how complicated they are. And you've read a lot of books, you've thought a lot of thoughts. And now when you go into relationships, you're very practical. Have you gone to school? Do you speak to your parents? Do you have any savings? Who are your friends? Do you smoke? Do you watch porn? Do you go to parties? Who's your favorite musician? Questions you never asked when you were 18. You do all of this, you know why? You just don't want to be hurt again. That's realism. The outcome of practical experience. Look around this room, Howard. There are some people who are no longer 20 or 30. And let's say they're not here because they want to get a PhD or a master's or a bachelor's. They're here just to pass time. It sucks to be home alone. And it sucks to be home alone with no aim. So they come here. They take classes. And the instructors, sure, they're boring as hell like me, but at least, they say there's an assignment due. That due assignment will give them a purpose for the next 4 or 5 days. They may not like it, but it's purposive. Okay? Now, there are some people in this room who are not in that position. They take classes for one reason. When they were 18, they dropped out. They had like these hippie ideas about themselves. I'm going to go out there and do A, B, C, D. Life can't touch me. I'm strong. I'm this. I'm that. Then they realize that life is a bit more too powerful for them. They keep being punched and floored. One day they look at themselves and they realize, well, I'm making $50 an hour, but it doesn't really make life go. So you know what realism does to them? It makes them regret all the things that they did. They should have stuck with school. They're no longer idealists. They've tasted some things. And they don't take classes because it's inspiring. It's something they have to do so they can go to a 4-year school. It's good to be a realist. Immigrants, they're realists. Connor, yes.
What you're basically saying is pride doesn't pay the bills, bite the bullet, do what needs to be done.
Yeah, it's like taking out the garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might not want to, but you have to.
You have to. Otherwise, you'll be sleeping on the sofa. Anyone else?
Good advice.
Avi? Anything? How do you prepare yourself to die? Really? So, death is an ending, and death can come in a variety of different ways. Let me do a tabloid version. So, for those of you who have never heard of Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, two very famous and popular and powerful porn stars. So they got together some years ago, things didn't work out. They split, they got married to different people or peoples. And a few years back, they got back together. And they got back together thinking that they're in a different place in life. They're both mature, they've learned from life experiences. Their hopes and dreams have been touched by realism, practical life experiences. Now they know how to make a relationship work. Okay? And these are all assumptions and imaginations. So they enter into this relationship with a good amount of hope and optimism. And they tell the rest of us that our relationships suck and we need to follow in their footsteps. And life begins to happen. And there's all of a sudden these cracks that appear from the very bottom of both of their consciousnesses, that they have habits, they're a little old, immature, part of the Hollywood or powerful, toxic culture. And little by little they realize they're not getting along. And one of them, perhaps late at night, has this whisper running in his head, I need to end this. It's not good for me. Well, what we're talking about is the death of a relationship and death to a relationship. It's a divorce. Now, what happens in the ending of anything. There is going to be fear, there's going to be doubt, there is going to be your reputation on the line. What are you going to tell your kids? What are you going to tell your ex? What are you going to tell this? What are you going to tell the fans? So in the ending of anything, it doesn't matter what it is. It's like, the ending of a movie that has glued you to a seat for the past 5 hours is going to come anytime. Well, how do you deal with that? What are you going to do? So ending of anything is going to be difficult, especially if there is no closure. Imagine you and I are married, and right as you and I are holding hands and walking, I drop to the floor and die. But just before that, we talked about buying a house, buying a car, taking our kids here and there. We have all these stories. But upon my death, all these stories will remain incomplete. What are you going to do? Not only are the stories no longer going to happen with me, but you weren't prepared for my demise. I am gone. Okay. So the first thing that you need to understand about death is it's an ending. And it's an ending from which there is no return. Now, how do you have closure? Well, it depends how many loose ends you have. Are your kids 5 or are they 55? Are your kids beginning life or have their life is settled? Because you worry about that, okay? Does your wife or husband depend on you? Do your parents depend on you? How many stories do you have? How many of those stories have you completed? You want to get married? Is it done? You want to be a mother? Is it done? You want to be a CEO? Is it done? You want to write a book? Is it done? You want it to be healthy? Is it done? And so the more loose ends you have, the less closure you're going to have. And the more loose ends you have, the more hopes and dreams you have that you will have enough time to finish all the narratives that you've written out for yourself to accomplish. Now, closure. A place of satisfaction, contentment. But if I was to die right now, I don't care about the ideas I have in my head. I don't care about the books I want to write. My kids, like any other kids in this classroom, they'll assume a few things, no different than the prodigal son. They'll go out there, spend their riches given to them by their parents, by culture, by society. They'll waste them because they don't have the knowledge to know how to use the tools well. They'll waste. And if they're lucky, okay, now I'm dead. If they're lucky, they'll have enough peace and comfort and trust to their mom. They'll go back and say, Mom, I made a mistake, forgive me. And the mom be big enough to say, okay, you know what, I forgive you. In other words, if I was to make this very, very short, if you have made peace with life, you can die well. The problem with life is that it creates ambitions and desires. Some of them you will find, you will touch, some of them won't. The more you understand, I suppose, the easier it is. Now, let me add this last piece to it as well. The problem with thinking or reflecting death is that your circle begins to shrink the more space it occupies inside you, because you're not just talking about death, you're talking about value and meaning and purpose. Since death could be at any moment, well, how much time do you really have? And the answer is not very much. What do you really want to talk about that inspires you? Well, when you look at people and the sort of things they think about and talk about, you realize, well, it's not really worth talking to them much. Okay? You have to be okay with being alone. Time shrinks. Time. You don't have very much of it. Okay? If you were to be very young and you were to die, that would be considered and categorized as a tragic death. I mean, look at the people in this room. They're young. They have hopes. They have dreams. They want to go places and they want to do things. It's their right. If anything bad was to happen to them, it would grieve their parents, it would grieve them. Their life is incomplete. So you don't want to die when you're young. If you are getting old, or maybe if you're just young and you have cancer and it's just eating your body away, you don't want to die in a painful way. That's a miserable death to have. The best kind of death, if you have closure with life, is pray that you may die in your sleep. We'll get back to, forgive me, Quinn,
If you had died, which would you prefer? Like in sudden or slowly?
Well, it depends if I'm a revolutionary, if I'm being tortured, and if I'm not, breaking under the torture, I'm not spilling out any secrets, that's a good death. But generally, a quick death would be good. Quinn.
Why do people like
But what?
why do people like horror?
Horror movies? I don't really know. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, some 4, 5, 10,000 years ago, had said something very interesting. There is something about us that very much enjoys violence. I don't know what it is. You can have your own assumptions and imaginations about it. I don't really know. Like there is an accident on the highway, 20 cops, police officers, and cars, and ambulances everywhere, blood is everywhere, and yet you want to stop and you want to look at the scenery. But let me take this in a way that perhaps didn't occur to you. And forgive me for taking it in such a kinky, awful way. And for those of you who may have trouble with this, my apologies. Pornography is about violence and pleasure, both at the same time. In fact, if you have a companion, and if you observe and examine, you don't have to tell your companion this. If you observe human sexual activity, there comes a point where you literally want to hurt your companion. You're profoundly violent. And it doesn't make any sense. There is something about us that enjoys violence very, 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 very much. You get a lot of pleasure from it. I'm not quite sure where it comes from. It could be primal, as Connor would say, that they've been around for a few million years. We have been violent by nature, and civilization is relatively new. And somehow we had to tame our violent primal nature in a way that other people can accept. But if you think about it, it's very troubling. Fun, but troubling. I can't tell you how many times I've watched Mike Tyson fight. And sometimes, there's I think there's this show about him. It's an hour and 15-minute show of all of his knockouts. And the guy's neck goes like 360. And you say, is he still alive? I mean, the way Mike just hit him, I love it. I don't know why. So for those of you in this class who don't like violence, think again. Any one? Connor, yes.
So, other animals do not do violence as much.
Well, human beings have to repress a lot of emotions because we have to live in society. I mean, again, look at this classroom. Look at the body language. I mean, some people really don't want to be here. And that's a lot of stress on their body and emotions. But you know what they have to do when they go home? They have to decompress. Yeah.
I spent several years preparing Air Force medics to go overseas. Those who haven't gone, or those who don't do those things, often do tend to be fascinated by the gore, by the grotesque, by the violent, until they've had the chance to see it up close. And I think it's very much that, as you mentioned, a society where, well, we don't get to be violent. We don't get to see those things or do those things. So, just as the child who really wishes they could get into the cookie jar, it loses its luster once it's been done a couple times.
It's true. Let me also add this particular footnote. There is what we call cultural release syndrome, and that's the following. If you look at a lot of movies that America makes, it revolves around violence. That you have a single hero who walks into a group and completely destroys it. And what happens is this. A lot of us in this particular culture, because of the stress of life itself and the culture and all the forces that are imposed upon us, somehow we have to find a way to release the tension. And one of the best ways you can do this is by watching Rambo. Because through his anger and through his desire for justice, something about me releases tension and stress. Pornography does the same exact thing. Okay? Mike Tyson does the same exact thing. Now, if you go to Iran, which is where I'm from, you realize we don't have the sort of anger that exists here. You don't have individual anger, but you have communal anger. A lot of people suffer from boredom. Suffer from poverty. So what you have, and by poverty I mean money in your pocket. So you have a ton of movies that revolve around social poverty. What finances do to destroy a life, to destroy a marriage, to destroy children. And it's interesting to kind of observe how culture creates movies that releases tensions. And so you have a lot of artists in America who see, say, individual traumas, and that's where the movies, revolve around. Then you have other cultures with different set of issues, and that's where the themes revolve around. Carmen?
How about is like why people believe that?
I could probably say a ton of things about it because it's something we talk about when I discuss Hinduism and Buddhism in my religion classes, but I don't want to do that. Can I tell it to you in this way, and then you can follow up? Hi. I don't really know if I'm a believer of karma or not. All I know is the following. My parents had a rough time with me. From the age 2 all the way to about 45, 46, maybe 50. And all the while, I imagine myself just expressing my creativity and individuality. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to do ABCDs. I want to be on the tennis court and play 8 hours a day. then something very interesting happened. I became a father. And then I realized my son is very much like me. I can't tell you the number of times I have to scream at him when I go home. What I did to my parents has now come back to haunt me. And it's an awful thing. And I gotta tell you, my appreciation for my parents has gone up 1,000-fold. Is it karma? I don't really know. Perhaps a fancy way of doing this, I would say, in life there is these two scales. Initially they're balanced, but then you do things that uneven the scales. One goes here, one goes up there. You crap all over life to elevate yourself. But if you see the scales, they're imbalanced. Somehow, at some time in your life, before you die, these two scales have to be balanced. What goes around must ultimately come around. You have to experience what you have imposed on other people. Let's say that you don't like my ramblings. You find it boring. So you play with your phone, you pack up your stuff and you leave. Okay? Well, one day you have to go home and talk to your parents about something that is really important to you. And your mom is going to say, honey, not now. But mom, I'm dying. I need to tell this to you. I don't really care right now. Go away. It comes in a variety of different ways. The idea that judge that you have in the Gospel of Matthew, don't judge if you don't want to be judged. I can't tell you, and I'm talking about my own personal experience, your experience may be different. All the things I have categorized as wrong or bad, I have done them. I was somehow either manipulated by my own self or other people. I did them myself. Karma initially didn't exist. What you have is the observation of some people, and it's always problematic when you have someone who thinks deeply about things, because they bring to the surface all the things that were hidden. These ideas are very much like you have a journal. No one has ever seen your journal. Nobody knows who you are. On the outside, you look really good and you present yourself well-mannered and all that. But your journal, it's a completely different story. And someone reads it. And from that point on, they don't respect you as much. They don't love you as much. They don't really care for you as much. So the first thing you need to know is that the concept, the idea of karma came from those people who looked at life and they realized that it seems every cause is an effect. The effect creates another cause. Everything just is circular. Nothing is linear. Nothing gets deleted. Everything is alive. And in some ways it became profoundly worrisome. Worrisome in this sense. If you truly believe karma exists in a very basic and practical way, if I'm boring you, Carmen, pretend that I excite and inspire you. Once in a while, raise your hand and ask a relatively intelligent question. Not because you want to engage and not because you want to participate, because you don't want this to happen to you in some shape or form. Because if your body language is disrespectful, if you're playing with your phone and yawning every left and right, I assure you it's going to happen to you. Someone will walk into your life at moments you care the most, where you want to share, and they won't pay you attention. And that's going to be painful for you. So that is what karma is. Whatever you do, it's eventually going to come back. Yeah.
Wasn't that video about idea of the universe to be random?
What do you mean?
In the video, talks about how, like, demonic plague or any sort of disaster that falls upon people is not necessarily because, God chose you to suffer or, like, over somebody else. It's purely random.
I see it more as a free, that's the thing, everything's connected. Everything's positive.
So, like, if karma is like a cause and effect, for example, if you cheat on a test and I don't know, like a bird poops on you right after, is that cause and effect? I would disagree.
Okay.
Humans are really good at pattern recognition, and it feels really good to know that if somebody hurts you, they're going to be hurt too. You just have to wait for it. Karma is people having faith that it'll be okay because I did good, and so good will come to
Yeah,
me.
that's what I was thinking.
And then you find patterns that make you believe it.
It's also very good for society.
No question on
Society in general.
Most of the knowledge people write it, this is old stuff, not new stuff. 20 years from now, somebody's going to be reading about what people wrote this decade, this stuff. Old Everybody that was observed back in the day, wherever they were back in the day. So everything has to be cause and effect.
You okay, Mia?
Always.
Chest ache?
You have to wait for the future to reflect on the past.
Anyone else with something that maybe they can? Mark?
Yeah, I'm teaching my son karma because I don't use like I grew up as a Christian, but I don't practice anymore in religion. So I don't raise my son with religion. But because of that, like now I look at like rappers as mentors, and I use like love here, like Jesus or whatever. Right? So now I have to use karma and say you act up, like this or not even tell them like you have a son a little bit, it's like that. So anyway, I'm reacting like this because maybe I was bad as a kid and now, acting like this, then, even him to act that.
A lot of us immigrants, when we came from Iran to America, not so much me and my brother because we were very young, people in their 30s and 40s, they had this dislike for religion because religion had poisoned really the Persian culture back home in all different ways. So when they came here and they were married and they had children, the first thing that they did is they said, we're not going to teach them Islam. Even though there were like a few schools in Sacramento area that taught the Persian language, Persian music, Persian culture, and religion, they said no. We don't want to contaminate our kids with like religious philosophy. And so my mom in particular told them, they were our friends, take them, put them in that school, it's good for them, you don't know what you're doing. They said, no, Miss Abzavari, you have no idea what you're talking about, you're old school. Okay, so time passed. And 90% of the parents that we knew, their kids went the wrong path. And by wrong, I mean they took the long path. They got into wrong relationships with different things. And then at the age of 10 or 11 or 12, the parents did something amazing. They sent their kids to these schools so they could understand the language, the culture, and the religion. There was a time where the culture would educate your kids, that it had enough good stuff in it. It had like 51% good stuff, 49 bad stuff. So when they would come home with relatively negative stuff, you would take care of most of it. TV was okay. There was no technology. Communities were small, so you didn't really have too many things to worry about. Now the story is very, very different. You may be allergic to religion for your own unique personal reasons. But when you look at society, the way it's moving, where it's moving towards, the people we consider to be our heroes, you have to find an antidote. If, for example, someone like Snoop Dogg happens to be the hero of the American culture, where you need to find a remedy just in case he overpowers your child's psyche. Maybe that's Malcolm X, maybe that's Jesus Christ, maybe that's George Washington. It depends on, who you yourself value a little. You can't really demonize anything for people, anything. You can expose them, and hopefully they'll have the ears and the eyes to see and hear. But consider your kid very much like the way you and I have kind of lived our lives. You make a lot of mistakes. Hopefully you catch yourself before it's too late. And you right some of the wrongs. Yeah. Anyone? Ivan? If there is nothing, it's okay. Howard?
And karma, I presidency,
I'm sorry, Howard. Can you maybe speak up a little?
all right. So when I talk about karma, what do you feel about that?
You know more about karma? Is that what you're saying? You know more about karma? Okay.
So this karma is quite different for so this karma is more like you have a past life. Right? Now, so what you do in your past life, so that's karma is this. So I think if you don't have the next life, so this life goes back to the next life. This is karma you do. But there's not just a karma that will be like other so there's also the called karma. Karma is like a cause and result. Like and karma is the fact that each person's karma that is not like for example, so you turn on the fire morning and if you forget, turn off and it just go away. The result is fire gonna immediately burn. Fire until you have. And there's a set of that will be result that fire will work until you turn it off, so it was broken.
Sure.
So that's a karma. So something you cause like like you're thirsty and you drink all water and you feel much better. That's also karma. It's like most people think of karma is just how things work, right? But Buddhist was kind of different. So like my mom was work and she thinks about doing what kind of things like for next life because there will be hours and
Sure.
like work better. But what I was saying to my mom, your life and next life will not be such connected. So what you feel like right now will not only affect that you will more like a purpose, leave a religion,
Let me forgive me. for those of you who are interested in Buddhism and the idea of reincarnation and karma, there is a book that came out some years ago. It's called Yakarta, 2 volumes. It's about the 538 different lives of the Buddha. So you can kind of read that in Sanskrit and then come to your own conclusions. But first you need to learn Sanskrit.
You also need to understand it.
Yeah,
Samsara.
and it's not really worth it, yeah. Is it time to go?
Yeah.
Thank God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.